So why make yourself pretty? You hardly bother even to dress. And then Peppy was suddenly moved to the bar, where the very opposite was necessary if you wanted to hold your ground, where you were always before other people's eyes. Those people, including some very finicky and observant gentlemen, and where you must always look as fine and pleasant as possible. Well, that was a great change. And Peppy might boast that she left nothing undone. How things turned out later didn't worry Peppy. She knew she had the abilities necessary for the job. She was sure of it. She is still convinced of it now, and no one can take that conviction away from her. Even today, the day of her defeat. The only difficult bit was knowing how to prove herself at first, because she was a poor chambermaid without nice clothes and jewelry, and the gentlemen don't have the patience to hang about and see how you grow into the job. They want a proper barmaid at once, without any in-between period, or they'll go someplace else. You might think their demands weren't great if Frida could satisfy them, but that wasn't so. Peppy had often thought about it. She said, had often been in Frida's company, even shared a bed with her for a while. It wasn't easy to make Frida out, and anyone who didn't study her very closely. And what gentleman is going to study a barmaid very closely? Would easily be led astray. No one knows better than Frida herself how pathetic she looks. For instance, when you first see her let her hair down, you clasp your hands in pity. A girl like that ought not really to be even a chambermaid. She knows it too, and she has cried her eyes out over it many a night, pressing close to Peppy and winding Peppy's hair around her own head. But when she was serving in the bar, all her doubts were gone. She considered herself a beauty and knew how to make everyone think so too. She knows what people are like. That's her real art, and she's a quick liar and deceptive, so that people don't have time to look at her more closely. Of course, that won't work forever. People do have eyes, and after all, their eyes would tell them the truth. But when Frida realized there was a danger of that, she had something else up her sleeve. Most recently, for instance, her relationship with Clam. Her relationship with Clam. If you don't believe me, you can go to Clam and ask him, said Peppy. How clever, how cunning. And if you daren't go to see Clam on that kind of subject, maybe you wouldn't be let in to see him on far more important business if Clam is entirely inaccessible, though only to you and your like. Because Frida, for instance, can pop in and see him whenever she wants. Well, if that's the case, you still can find out. You'd think you only had to wait. Clam wouldn't allow such a false rumor to circulate for long. He really likes to know what's said about him in the bar and the guest rooms. All that is very important to him. And if it's false, he'll soon put it right. But he hasn't put it right. So people think there's nothing to put right, and it's the truth. What you see is only Frida taking the beer to Clam's room and coming out again with the payment. But Frida tells you what you haven't seen, and you have to believe her. Although, in fact, she doesn't tell you. She wouldn't reveal such mysteries. No, the secrets spread of their own accord around her, and once they've spread, she doesn't shrink from speaking of them herself, but in a modest way, without claiming anything, just referring to what's common knowledge. Not to everything. For instance, not that Clam drank less beer than before since she was serving in the bar. Not much less, but distinctly less. She doesn't talk about that, and there could be various reasons. It could be that a time came when Clam didn't like beer so much, or that Frida made him forget about drinking beer. Anyway, surprising as it may be, let's say Frida was Clam's mistress. But if someone is good enough for Clam, why wouldn't others admire her too? So, Frida became a great beauty, just like that. The kind of girl that's needed in the bar. Almost too beautiful, too powerful. Soon the bar would hardly be enough for her. And sure enough, it seemed strange to people that she was still in the bar. It's a great thing to be a barmaid. And from that point of view, her connection with Clam seemed very credible. But if the barmaid is Clam's mistress, why did he leave her in the bar for so long? Why didn't he promote her to better things? You can tell people 1,000 times that there was nothing contradictory about this, that Clam had his reasons for acting in such a way, or that sometime, perhaps very soon, Frida's promotion would come. None of that had much effect. People get certain ideas, and in the long term, they won't be persuaded otherwise, not by any odds. No one doubted that Frida was Clam's lover. Even those who obviously knew better were too tired to doubt it. For heaven's sake, call yourself Clam's lover then, they thought. But if you really are, we'll notice by your rise in the world. However, no one noticed anything, and Frida stayed in the bar as before and was secretly very glad to stay there. But she lost faith with other people. She couldn't help noticing that, of course. She does notice things, usually even before they've happened. A really beautiful, attractive girl. Once she's become used to working in the bar, doesn't have to employ any arts. As long as she's beautiful, she will be a barmaid, unless something especially unfortunate happens. A girl like Frida, however, must always be anxious about her job. Of course, she doesn't show it in any obvious way. She's more likely to complain and curse the job. But in secret, she keeps observing the atmosphere. So she saw how people were getting indifferent to her. It wasn't worth looking up when Frida came in. Even the servants didn't bother about her anymore. They understandably stuck to Olga and girls like that. And she noticed the behavior of the landlord and saw that she was nowhere near so indispensable anymore. She couldn't always be making up new stories about Clam. There are limits to everything. So dear Frida thought up something new. Who would have seen through it from the first? Well, Peppy had guessed, but unfortunately hadn't seen right through it. Frida decides on a scandal. She, Clam's lover, will throw herself at the first man who comes along. Perhaps someone totally insignificant. That will attract attention. People will talk about that for a long time. And at last, they'll remember what it means to be Clam's lover.